The golden age of America begins right now. America will soon be greater, stronger, and far more exceptional than ever before.
President Trump, January 20th, we all remember it. CBS News polling finds his approval rating, though, not so golden. Not dingy, but not as golden. It slipped. February 9th, 53% of the country approved of the job President Trump was doing. That number now stands 45%. CBS News Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, your friend and mine, Anthony Salvanto, joins me now. Anthony, break us down where things stand, where they were, and what the trajectories might suggest about the future.
Hey there, Major. So, look, you want to compare a president, first and foremost, to what he promised to do in the campaign, right? That's the evaluative metric, especially early on at 100 days. Look, 6 in 10 Americans say, yeah, he is doing what he said he would do in the campaign. Now, there's differences on whether they like that or not. But, I want to point out, look at the strong number of people who voted for him who say that he is doing what he promised in the campaign. And that explains the fact that, by and large, that base of support continues to approve. That's helping underpin those numbers. But the movement, Major, let me show you this. The movement on inflation is notable because it is down. It is his handling of inflation that is down. The movement has come from people who were kind of giving him a chance on the economy, hoping that his policies would make them financially better off, which many expected. But what we're seeing now is that more relatively say they think his policies are making them worse off as compared to better. And that sets up a bit of a disconnect between what was expected going in and what they're seeing now. And that's behind some of that movement, Major.
Anthony, among those who are supporters of President Trump, is there a way that we've detected in the data that they're willing to hang on, that they're not going to give up, and they're going to ride this out even though it looks a bit bumpy for them and for the president? Yeah,
as usual, you asked just the right question there, Major. And
it's not in the prompter, folks. I promise you that's not in the prompter. I just asked that question.
And from the Great Minds file, I thought it was a really good question, too, because I asked it in the poll. And I said, how much time would you give? Is 100 days enough time to judge a president? And to answer your question, look at the number of Republicans, or more than 2/3, who say, no, it's not enough time. Look, they see big things going on. They see a lot of changes. Most Americans do. And they say it's not enough time to evaluate it. Now, Democrats, by and large, they say they've seen what they seem to need to see at this point. And a lot of them say that they're frustrated by the way their party is handling the new administration. But Republicans, by and large, are saying, give it more time.
Anthony, very quickly, immigration. What do we know?
Immigration deportation program continues to get approval, but there is a bit of a difference in the principle that maybe they see in the program, but then the application. There's one of these points here. Many people saying it's not acceptable if, as a result of the program, legal U.S. residents are mistakenly either detained or deported. So it's in principle versus in practice that you see a little bit of that disconnect, Major.
Anthony Salvanto, thank you very much. I want to bring in our reporter panel. Megan Messerly is a White House reporter for Politico. Tyler Pager, White House correspondent for the New York Times. Great to have you both. Thanks for being here. I'm sure this caught your eye. It certainly caught mine. President Trump's interview with The Atlantic, where he contrasts the first term and the second term. And let me quote him directly. The second time, I run the country and the world. Yeah, wow. Okay, that's not just aspirational. That's like declaratory. Megan?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen that in his tariff policy, right? The sense that, he believes that America has
He may
been
run the world, but
ripped
not the
off.
bond markets.
Not the bond markets, no. We found that's the one pain point that he is willing to respond to. But I think we've seen in that, right? He really, truly believes that U.S. has been taken advantage of by the rest of the world, and he is now exerting his power. It was striking display when he was, at the Vatican over the weekend with all of these world leaders who he is currently putting a lot of pressure on right now with tariffs. And it's really just, I think it gets to the heart of that idea that he really does believe he's the one in charge and runs the world.
And Tyler, our numbers are down, not as far down as some other polls, but they're all relatively consistent, showing the same trajectory. Less approval of the president overall, less confidence in his current handling of the economy, unease about tariffs, that's putting it mildly, Those pollsters aren't wrong. They're all capturing something. They shouldn't be investigated. They shouldn't be put in jail, though the president intimated as much on social media. Where do you think the president and the White House feel they are at 100 days with these poll numbers?
Yeah, I think it depends who you're asking and who you're talking to, right? Obviously, President Trump always has a very rosy view of things, has basically declared the first 100 days an unabashed success.
Correct.
But I think when you look a little bit deeper into the poll numbers, as you were just, asking Anthony to do, there are clear signs of eroding support. And I think it's also indicative of the highly divided country that we live in and the partisanship that continues to sort of govern the day. I think one of the things that we've heard from some Trump advisors is concerned particularly about the economy. No surprise there. The economy often drives how people decide their vote. And that was one of the big weaknesses for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and Democrats more broadly. Now, as we hurtle towards the midterms, obviously still more than a year away, we're starting to see some Republicans raise concerns about the tariffs and the impact on their constituents. And I think it's only going to get worse as the market tries to adapt to these price increases. And the president, has this sort of unclear policy of exactly what he's going to do, the whiplash. One of the things the markets want, investors want, is some sort of stability. And the president has not really given that. And so I think that's the pain point that we're seeing across the board, and particularly as you look at independents who were willing to give Trump more of a longer leash on the economy are frustrated by the policy so far.
And Megan, look, the Biden White House ran into this. They talked about inflation in their way. Voters and American consumers interpreted inflation their way. And when the opportunity arose to offer a verdict on their level of satisfaction with what the White House was saying under Biden about inflation and what they were experiencing, they rendered that verdict, leading us to President Trump 2.0.
Exactly.
We're not at that stage at 100 days or 99 days of that level of verdict. But there is, it seems to me, a risk factor here for the White House to describe something that even your own base supporters aren't quite yet experiencing.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's one of the big challenges that we've seen is the administration as they try to argue, we are doing well right now. Look at the investments that are coming into this country. Look at all this future success we're going to have. The problem is that people aren't seeing that today, right? They aren't seeing that when they go to the grocery store, when they are purchasing items. And that's exactly, to your point, the problem that Biden ran into. This idea that, you can tell people that by all these economic measures, however you want to slice and dice it, that things are going well. But if they're actually not feeling that at home in their household budgets, when they're living their day-to-day lives, that's going to be a problem. And that's really what we're running into. And you've had the president say, you just need to wait. Just trust me. We'll see the impact of these tariffs and these investments, and they're going to pay off in the long term as we have all this job creation and reshoring, though, with some of these deals, it's unclear exactly what direction we're going, right? Are we trying to raise a bunch of revenue from tariffs, or is the goal really to make these deals with other countries? And I think that's the problem right now is that, American voters are giving him a little bit of leeway, his own base, more so than other folks. But at some point, they're going to need to see some progress.
And Tyler, immigration is a clear area of emphasis, not just in rhetoric, not just in the visuals that we talked about earlier in this program on the North Lawn of the White House, but in terms of policy. And our own polling data shows a little bit of emerging ambivalence when it comes to U.S. citizens. And over the weekend, we had children born in this country who have citizenship status removed with their undocumented mothers. Do you interpret, and does the White House interpret that it's pushing up against anything there with this maximalist application of available federal immigration laws?
Look, I think when you talk about immigration policy, it really comes down to two key people here, and that's Donald Trump and Stephen Miller. And they have shown no interest in moderating the policy or positions at this point. I do think, to your point, that Americans are capturing some of the nuance that Democrats are really trying to drive home a point about, which is that there needs to be due process and protections for people that are legal permanent residents, that are citizens, all of that. And so I think that is something that Democrats we've seen really try to hone in on is this idea that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach and you can just pick people up and send them out of the country. It does not seem that that is concerning to Republicans in the White House. I think one of the things that we're seeing, though, is Republicans trying to really focus in on the most extreme examples. We saw that at the White House with the images of people leading up the driveway there in front of the White House. So it's clear that there is some pressure, but it doesn't seem that that is going to force them to moderate or change their position at all.
Megan Messerly, thank you so much. And Tyler Pager, appreciate it. Thank you.